so instrumental in. But how did that come across to you?
Well, 5 years ago when I was in the oil field, I would have worried about my job and losing my job. But now, especially since I have a son in the military and I see that they're there for their country, I would think, that that's a really good message that they're sending out, and they do care. But the people I worked with, and most of them in the oil field, are basically ultra-conservative people that think drill, baby, drill, but they also claim to be patriots. So I don't see how any roughneck, any oil field worker could even argue with them, and they would have to stop and think about what are the other alternatives, and if they're creating jobs, then maybe there's a livelihood there too, But
well, if you're creating jobs, you're keeping our troops out of harm's way or more harm's way than they're already in. And potentially down the line, when people are actually fighting over clean water and clean food instead of oil at some point, I mean, how is this a lose?
Yeah, it's not.
I'm hoping that every Alaskan now has a reason. And if you've got to support the troops magnet on your Hummer, your magnet was probably made in China. Don't chew on it. And it might have poison in it. But honestly, get real. Get patriotic and start thinking about this stuff. This week, breaking news, Alyeska CEO resigns. Kevin Hostler, the CEO over at Alyeska Pipeline, who spent 27 years working for BP, which isn't a surprise. Alyeska is owned by more than 40%. More than 40% of Alyeska is owned by BP. And I don't know if you've noticed, they haven't been really able to handle all the news that's coming out about them. He resigned. What did this mean to you, Mike? Because so many of the reasons that were listed in Jason Leopold's article that was on Truthout and the mudflats.net and has been picked up around the country were things that you've been saying for years, that Chuck Hamill's been saying for years, that so many people have been saying for years, and now it's finally being heard. Well,
the first thing I thought it was a victory for the working man. That it looked to me, and from talking to some of the guys, that they revolted and had enough, and not only them, but BP managers also. That through whatever happened in the Gulf of Mexico was things that built up from before the pipeline leaks, the safety, the retaliation, and they've had enough. And I think that's the first thing I look at is the workers finally stood up for themselves. And they're talking to people like Jason. They're telling the truth now. It's like the general said, if you tell the truth right off the bat, well, BP can't do that. They're not credible, but the workers can, and they did something. I think it was the workers.
So hopefully things will start getting safer.
I think they will if the workers keep standing up for themselves.
And we should support their ability to do that. You're nodding. What do you think about this?
Oh, absolutely. They have to stand up. The larger issue here that I find problematic is that this is far deeper than any one individual at a pipeline company. What the true fallout here is, it really goes back to decisions like the Supreme Court decision with the Exxon Valdez case, where they cut the punitive damages to what, 1/10? Was it 1/10 of what it originally was?
10 cents on the dollar.
And what this means...
I'm not bitter.
Of course you're not. But what this really means is that now people, these boardroom executives, Hostler, whomever, it doesn't matter, the next suit they put there, can actually budget for tragedies. They can budget for disasters. And this is very troubling to me, as an Alaskan, but as a human being as well.
Right, the cost of doing business.
That's right. It is actually cheaper for them to pay punitive damages than to do the necessary maintenance, and they defer and defer and defer until people get blown up on an oil rig. And this is very troubling to me.
It's a culture.
It's
from the bottom to the top. To the littlest thing, we have procedures on the slope. For every operation on a drilling rig, a production site, whatever the industry is, the hands make the procedures. We're just working people, and the people that are supposed to, it's just like the federal government let BP make their own environmental impact study. But if something happens, guess whose fault it is? It's the hands. They make the procedures. And that culture goes all the way up to deep water, and it's gotten so bad that them hands, instead of standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to do that, they buckled down to the pressure, and look what happened.
That's right. The regulatory coziness you're talking about is unbelievable. It's unfathomable to have a corporation investigate itself, to spearhead its own investigation. Is just outrageous. And you don't have to work on the patch or on the slope or on a platform to be impacted by this. Our state government is 90% funded by oil and gas revenue. And when that pipe shuts down, as it did for 3 days in May most recently, we're not making any money.
We just lost 60, 70, 80 million dollars in a week.
Oh, yeah, in an
so
hour
maybe we have an
potentially.
interest in that. Maybe we should look at that when you've got just a little bit, like a 90%. And how many people could we have funded for that lost revenue and given jobs to actually be watching that? And you know, you look at the Minerals Management Service, which is federal, of course, but you know, talk about getting into bed. When you wake up pregnant from getting into bed with an oil exec, and I mean that in the literal sense. And maybe you don't remember a lot because you were so high on cocaine. I mean, what did they name that baby? I just want to know.
Petroleus.
You know, seriously, when MMS got pregnant from an oil exec, what did they, we should find out what they named that baby. Maybe we'll do that on the break. We'll do that. We'll
Somebody
be right
Google
back.
that.
Somebody
Google it.
that. We'll be right back with more of Mike. Welcome back to More Up North. My guest, of course, BP whistleblower Mike Mason, Alaska Dispatch Managing Editor Maya Nolan. Are you changing your last name, Miss Mary Pants?
It's still under discussion. He doesn't want me to.
Make him change his. Strategies 360 consultant David Shurtleff. And
whose wife did change her name.
She did. I told her I'd take hers, and I quickly regretted it.
David Shurtleff has the most beautiful wife in Alaska, I'm quite sure.
It makes no sense.
Entirely possible.
It makes no sense. Own it.
I'll own it.
All right. So, you know, Maya was complaining to me earlier today that we are in the midst of the most boring governor's race in the history of Alaska. Like, it couldn't be more boring at all, unless they do a swimsuit competition.
In which case it becomes horrifying.
And then it's going to be something totally different, okay? Of course, you know, we've got the right shoving each other around. There's the left, which is Bob Poe is now out of the race. So it's Ethan Berkowitz and Hollis French. And I think they should just arm wrestle and get it over with. Yes. But on the right side, we've got Bill Walker.
It's the Battle of the Gas Lines.
It's the Battle of the Gas Lines, which sounds like you'd actually need to go to a doctor and get something that fizzes to drink to get rid of. But Ralph Samuels, who actually spoons on camping trips, oil companies, I understand, some sort of broke-back event that happens.
Listen, Ralph Samuels is a good-looking man, so.
And you know what? He makes a good chicken dinner. Story you won't be hearing at 11. And then we've got, what's that other guy's name?
Captain Zero?
I think he's more Private Zero. I really do. I have actually talked to him. He's been on the show. And I'm serious. I just want to grab him by the throat and be like, what do you think, or are you? A couple of things. One thing that he has right now that's out there is this whole idea of choose respect to try to take down Alaska domestic violence. We are #1, don't be proud, for rape, incest, domestic violence. I don't like that statistic. I don't like that statistic at all. And he seems very committed to it. In fact, he is willing to fund 10% of the village officers we need. Part of the biggest problem with the rape and incest in Alaska is that they're not prosecuted, so people keep being predators, because it's very difficult to have someone be on the scene to take enough evidence that you can actually prosecute someone. 10%. 10%. It's not
of the reactive end of dealing with interpersonal violence, not the preventive end.
Right. Of how you're actually going to be prosecuting people and getting them off the street. Last week, and I want to say, Jill Burke wrote an article for the Dispatch that was great. She had followed up really closely. Governor Sean Parnell had traveled on the state's dime
to Colorado.
To Colorado, which is sort of a square in the middle of the country, if you haven't heard of it. And it has this, there's this place there in Colorado Springs. James Dobson lives there. He's a big proponent for spanking your children. I think it's better to wait till you're an adult, but I'm just saying that. So he flew more than 3,000 miles with his wife and 2 other people. And apparently he needed a security guard because sitting down with a preacher could be really dangerous. So he went down there and wanted to talk to them there at Focus on the Family about how to prevent domestic violence in Alaska. Your thoughts? Maya Nolan.
Well, I'm glad you gave credit to Jill because she has really owned this story and been very passionate about following up on this story. But he flew with his wife, security guard and assistant, to Colorado. It cost the state about $5,000 of your money to go meet with Focus on the Family, not just with leadership of Focus on the Family. He met with the vice president of Focus on the Family, I think Tom Minery, who is a distant cousin of Jim Minery, who we all know here from Alaska Family Council. And
he's basically the uterus police.
She said